Hi brothers and sisters, Naomi back for another video. I thought today's video would take a look at the two serpents in Numbers 21, particularly verse 9. It says this: So Moses made a bronze snake or serpent and put it up on a pole, and then when anyone was bitten by a snake and looked at the bronze snake, they lived. Well, we want to look at the color too, if I can think to. I've been losing my train of thought so easy. But it's interesting because, you know, this verse always confused me a great deal. Because the same thing that was biting them and poisoning was the same thing that they were expected to look to that was going to let them live. Right? Don't we find that a bit strange? Especially given the fact of our understanding of the meaning of serpent. Right? It's something very negative. The serpent snuck into the garden and tempted Eve, beguiled Eve. Well, number one, that's a lie. That was the accusation made, right? And that indictment is found, actually, in the book of Job. And I believe it's Job 31. Yeah, it's Job 31 or 30. It's one of those two chapters, all right? That indictment. But it's very curious that the same thing that was poisoning them was going to give them life, right? And we know all about the serpent story, all right? But that serpent that was biting them and poisoning them, again, this is an allegory. To what? What is it an allegory to? Well, let's get our figurative understanding of snake first, okay? And usually how it works, and this is a little trick for anybody who's actually interested, okay? Now, I'm going to give you a brief example here of how figurative works. Now, in the Old Testament, I found this verse in Isaiah 26. It says, We have been with child, we have, as it were, brought forth wind. We have not wrought a deliverance in the earth, and the inhabitants of the world have not fallen. Now, it's talking about the daughter Zion there. And she says, we haven't brought a deliverance in the earth. She says, all we've birthed is wind. Well, I could not understand what they were driving at. What had these daughters birthed? Because when you go in and you look the word wind up there, it did not give you the understanding of what they were speaking of. It would give you 7307. And that just did not answer the question. Figurative of wind, and they do this a lot for anybody who's actually interested in understanding the figurative or your allegorical overview, which is what we're looking at on this channel, our allegorical and our figurative understanding of terminology in the Bible. But when you went to Greek, it was the Greek number 417, and the Holy Spirit showed me this. I did not have a clue. But the Holy Spirit kept putting that number in front of my face, 417, 417, 417. I believe it popped up in one day for me 3 times in one day. And so I was like, well, what do you want me to see that number for? So I pulled it up in the Strong's Hebrew, and then I pulled it up in the Greek, and there it was. That was what this Holy Spirit was trying to show me. And what it meant was it was a figurative understanding of the word wind. And it meant empty doctrines, right? That was our figurative understanding. And I find they do the same thing for most of the words that I fail to understand in a figurative context. So I could not understand the figurative understanding or meaning of snake in the Old Testament. And so I just simply pulled up Greek, Strong's Greek, and I punched in figurative meaning of snake. And this is the word that I pulled up. All right, there was 2 or 3 you could choose from, and I went through them all, but this was the one that gave me the figurative understanding of snake that I was kind of looking for. So it's Greek 3789. So this is how they tend to work with you figuratively. If you don't understand the meaning of something figurative in the Old Testament, look for it in the Greek. And oftentimes they will give it to you in a figurative sense in the Greek. Now that's important to know if you're studying allegory, okay? So here it was, 3789, Greek. A snake, a serpent. It's used to mean the devil or Satan. We know this one. It's probably from the Greek word optinomai. I can't say the word. I'm not Greek. I'm not even a good pronouncer of words unless I practice. O-P-T-A-N-O-M-A-I. And it's through the idea of sharpness of vision. So figurative is saying snake means something that has sharp vision. It means they see things very well. Alright? And again, I tend to take that in an allegorical sense. It means their understanding is very high. They see things that other people do not see or understand. Okay? So it's giving you an idea of your figurative understanding of the word snake through the idea of sharpness of vision, or as a type of sly cunning. So very crafty. So you have one positive and you have one negative. Because if you look up you.May, let's look that up. Let's see if I can do that. Yeah, I have it right here. So that is your Greek number 3700. I appear, am seen. I let myself be seen by. Become, seen, appear. Okay, so it means to allow yourself to be seen, number one, which I'm sure there's a deeper understanding there too, which is used for it in certain tenses and both as alternate to another word, to gaze with wide open eyes as at something remarkable, and thus differing from another word which denotes simple voluntary observation, and from another word, edu, which expresses merely mechanical, passive, or casual vision, while you.May, and still more emphatically, its intensive theorio, signifies an earnest but more continued inspection, a watching from a distance, appear, look, see, show, self. Okay, so we've got an understanding there, at least to some degree, that we can work with in trying to understand what these two serpents actually are meaning. Okay, so it means to be able to see things. It's a sharpness of a vision. That's your figurative understanding. Whether you're looking at wicked or righteous. Now, the thing here, when I could not understand, and this was years ago that I had this question. I would sit there, and every time they would bring up the serpent in the wilderness must be lifted up, even so the Son of Man must be lifted up. There was this big puzzle to me. Why would you lift up a serpent and compare that to Christ? It did not add up. It didn't make sense to me. When I had my understanding that a serpent was bad, 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 bad. And yet here we have a serpent that bit them and poisoned them and was killing them. They would die. And yet here we had instructions from God to Moses to make a brass serpent, the color's important, and put it on a pole. That pole in most pictures looks like a scepter, by the way. And so here he was instructed to put this serpent on a scepter, and any that had been bit by this serpent that was poisoning them, this serpent on a scepter would give them life. Now you're all understanding what I'm driving at if you've been watching my videos. You already know this verse. I've given it many times. Galatians 4:24. These two women are an allegory, for the women represents two covenants. What's the two covenants? Well, one's with the harlot spirit, that's Babylon, daughter Babylon. And what's the other one supposed to be with? What's the other one we're supposed to be with? Now I remember it. It's Jeremiah. Alright. What's the other one with? Anybody who's studied the Bible ought to know this. If truth truly matters to us as the saints of God, and God's truth matters to us, then we ought to know who that other covenant was with and who it represents. It was supposed to be with the righteous spirit, known as daughter Zion, who got cast down. And we've discussed how that was so. So here we have two women in allegory. For the women represents two covenants. One covenant from Mount Sinai, and bears children unto slavery. We're under bondage of what came from Mount Sinai, and bears children into slavery. This is Hagar. But watch what verse 25 says. I didn't write it down, so I'll read it from my Bible. So verse 25 says, For this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and answereth to Jerusalem, which now is and is in bondage with her children. Now, this is the question posed. Where did our doctrine come from? Where did our current world theology that religion is based upon come from? Did it not come from current day Jerusalem? Did it not? It came from the prophets. It came from there, who supposedly translated the word that came from God from there, right? But what we came to understand is the men did not uphold their covenant with daughter Zion. They cast her out into the fields of the Gentiles. And we've discussed how Mother told this daughter Zion to break her covenant. In symbology, again, it's figurative. She's told, and it is a she, they got a he like they do with everything. It was amazing. Before I get off track here, I got to make a note so I don't forget where I was going. But it's amazing because, you know, where I used to attend, whenever the men in the New Testament, my dog's seeing something out the window. She's stamping her little feet. I don't know if you can hear her clicking little claws. But anyway, but whenever the men on the pulpit would read the New Testament, it would be he. They would sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes they would say, now remember, women, ladies, that includes you also. Just because it says he, it doesn't mean just us. They would sometimes qualify it with that. Usually it was something, you know, and I know I can be sensitive, but it did seem to be this way. It was usually something very negative. When it was something very positive and it was he, they would usually not include us in that context. And I find they do that a lot. When the he, such as the seraphim are described as he, well, it don't mean you girls. It means us. It's saying he. And yet, when much of the negative aspects say he, they make sure to say, but it includes you ladies too. I love that. I love it. I was amazed by the one-track mindedness of it all. And that nobody else could see it. It was amazing. But if truth matters to us, and it should because it's God's truth, we're going to want to understand the truth the way the Lord wants us to understand it. And the way my Christ wants me to understand it. He says, beloved. You know, how does he say it? I want you to earnestly contend for the faith that I once gave you. I knew this truth. I'm the only begotten Son that Israel brought forth, who knew this truth. That's why I was an acceptable offering unto God. And so he says to his beloved Spirit, and that's one daughter. All right? And I'm not the only one who's finding this truth. I don't believe it for a second. I believe we're a called out number, 144,000 of us. Many are called, few are chosen. And we are told why we were chosen in Zephaniah chapter 3. Okay, I'm getting off track here. But he says to his beloved, now understand, heaven knows who this beloved is. She's the one that this scepter has always been reserved for. We don't know who she is. We don't know. But if you've been called out, then you know you're getting an inkling of God's truth, heaven's truth. Not man-made theology, and what he's telling you the truth is. It tickles his little ears. This was something else I would often say where I went. You know, don't fall for a doctrine that tickles your ears. And yet the whole time the men were preaching one that tickled theirs. The whole time. The whole time. And yet they were warning me. Why? Why were they warning me? Because this is man-made theology founded upon the harlot spirit that his covenant is with, that he hides in his heart. We've discussed this, so I'm not going to discuss it again. But what did God say to this daughter. And again, we're understanding in allegories, all right? We're understanding things figurative. This is the pure language that we were always intended to understand. Some would say, well, no, that's the original Hebrew restored back to us. No, it ain't. No, it ain't. The pure language is the allegory that we have failed to understand and interpret the scriptures through. And I'll tell you, it is through the allegory that my greatest understanding of the scriptures has come through. It has not come through literal understanding. I mean, after all, how does a king in the book of Daniel, I believe it's chapter 8, cast down the stars and stamp upon them? It has to be figurative. It has to be allegorical, and indeed it is. And so this is the language that we truly are meant to understand the Bible in. All right? So, Zechariah 11. What we understand about these two serpents in allegory is that we have to understand what was going on in the camp of the Israelites. All right? That's important to understand. Now, I did a video on what was actually taking place in the camp, and I'll post the video below. I've posted on many other videos that I've linked to this. So if you've seen it, you know, good. But the thing that we need to understand, we fail to understand, is the way to understand the key of David is we're going to have to go back through the historical accounts in the Old Testament to understand what the key of David is, because that's where we actually find the key. All right? And you have two components to the key of David. You have the key and you have David. All right? So you're looking at two separate components here. And so you're going to have to use your brain, such as the occult world exalts the key of Solomon. Well, why? What's going on? You know? But you understand that these two women are an allegory to two covenants. And what came from Jerusalem, which it tells us, right, puts Hagar and her children under bondage. What fed out to this world if it wasn't the doctrine of this covenant between the harlot spirit, represented as Hagar, which puts the children under bondage of the laws that came supposedly from Mount Zion, Jerusalem. All right? This is the one that puts you in bondage, the law, Old Testament law. And this is the doctrine that continued to feed out to the four corners of the globe, known as the covenant with the harlot spirit, daughter Babylon, that man exalts in his heart because then he gets to teach a doctrine that tickles his ears, and he writes the laws that are designed to subjugate those righteous daughters under men. All right? And so that's the covenant that tastes like honey on their tongues, and when they preach it, it tickles their ears, but it's cobra's venom in their stomach. That's really what it is. So what was going on in the camp of the Israelites here when the serpents was biting them? All right? You understand it's allegorical. It's also got a physical context. Yes, it probably really was going on. But the allegory, you have to understand what was actually going on in the camp of the Israelites. This is going to take us back to Balaam and Balak. All right? And we get, I think it's, let's go there. I think it is Psalm chapter 106. Now, I didn't go in and look at it again. It's been a while since I've looked at this chapter, but it is Psalm 106, I believe. But there's so many passages that we looked at when we were looking at what was really going on with Balaam and Balak and what they were attempting to do. And that comes into this understanding of the serpent that bites and poison, and the one that is wrapped around the scepter that'll give you life. And this takes us back to the two women who are an allegory. Now, what was Balaam trying to do to the camp of the Israelites, okay? He was trying to curse them, wasn't he? Balak had hired him to curse the nation of Israel, which was the woman's seed. It was the one country that had come from Eve. And Mother God promised Eve that the covenant would be remade through her seed. That was the nation of Israel. This covenant between one male, representing body, temple, and one spirit, representing spirit and the spiritual aspect. That's one female. One male, one female. One body, one spirit. The woman came out of the man after she had shaped him. Right? Problem was the man didn't want her shaping. That's the problem. He wanted to rule himself. He did not want the laws of heaven. And Job tells us, he said, I made a covenant with my eyes. Why then should I think upon a maid? This is taking you back to what Adam did. He did think upon a maid. This takes you back to the book of Proverbs, where you have two women in allegory, one called wisdom and one called a harlot. And what does it say? Her steps leads down to the gates of Sheol. This is the poison that was poisoning them. And this is what Balaam and Balak was up to. Balaam tried to curse him. He couldn't. So he turns to Balak. Balak says, what good are you to me? I hired you to curse the nation of Israel. Because you see, all the Adamic nations were these nations that surrounded the nation of Israel. And we're told Israel is surrounded by thorns and thistles. That's representative of the man's land that was cursed because he hearkened to the harlot spirit that he married, that became his wife. All right? And he cast down the righteous spirit. So mother promises the woman after the man, sets her apart. And he's instructed to do it by Mother God, right? Set her out. He did not want a covenant with her and renames her Eve, mother of all life. Because that's what woman represents, the spirit that is the life of all things. And she was also the last thing created representing the glory. All right? So here Balaam says, fine, I can't curse him, and you want me to take out that right hand. The right hand in scriptures, we learned, is known as daughter Zion. That was one of her names that she was known by, the right hand, the strong right hand. And so Balaam says to Balak, go get your women. And he's saying, go get your harlots. And send them into the men of the camp of the Israelites and seduce them. All right? And you begin to teach them another way. All right? You begin to show them Adam's way, the Adamic nation's way, the harlot spirit's way, which is that I'll be under you. I'll agree to play your harlot and teach your doctrines and your word of truth. All right? And you will be the God of this world. And the men got a hold to that, and it tasted like honey. It was tasting so good to them that they even came against Moses. And it states it in Numbers that Korah was one of them that come against Moses. And he came against them after Balaam and Balak sent the women of those harlot nations, of those Adamic nations, in to poison the men of Israel, so that they would cast down the righteous daughters of Zion, which was the glory that Moses would speak to. He would go and speak to them. And from there, he would receive the words of God, all right, in which the governing of the people took place. So here we are getting a deeper understanding, truly, of our allegory of the serpent on the scepter. Your scepter is a Zion, daughter Zion. We get our understanding of the word serpent. It means to see clearly. It means to understand things that nobody else understands or are even willing to attempt to understand. They're so sure they have the doctrine of truth. But if you go to Psalm 106, Mother promises them, because they were casting down her strong right hand, which they love to talk in lingo, so they don't have to say daughter Zion right out. It would kill them to give the feminine any credit. Yet Proverbs speaks, you will receive your word, your waters, your well from your wife as the righteous spirit. That's who it comes through. That's Proverbs 5. Then it tells us the bride is a garden sealed, a fountain sealed. In Song of Songs 4, verse 11, I think, or 12, is one of those verses. I can't remember now. But in Psalm 106, she says to him, you men, you're casting off my scepter, the way that the nations are ruled, which is through the daughter of Zion. And you're casting off her righteous words for the harlot. And you're being poisoned by those doctrines. That's killing you. They taste like honey on your tongue. Oh, they're so sweet, them harlots, when they come into you. And are telling you something you want to hear and you want to be a part of so bad you want to believe it's the truth. That's the imaginations of their wicked mind that God speaks of in Jeremiah 23, and how those men of Baal is another word for your husband who wanted to rule over you. Those archers shot at those daughters of Sion, the branches that pass through the wall in the gate of David that leads you to your key of David. We've done studies on this. I'm not going to do it again, but I'll throw it in where I need to. And these same men that had been infected by the harlots from the surrounding Adamic nations began to poison these men in the nation of Israel and the doctrine that they stood for. They came from the daughter of Zion. So here we have the allegory of the serpent that bit them, that poisoned them. That's the wormwood. That's your law that's poisoning you, that's killing you. That's the Babylonian law that actually fed out to the four corners of the globe. That's called Jerusalem, Sion got the blame upon her head as the Azazel goat for what went on there, but it wasn't her doctrine. It was the harlot's doctrine and fallen Adam's doctrine. And that's where you get the key of Solomon coming into play, which is spoke all about in Isaiah 22. We discussed this in one of our last 2 or 3 videos. Can't remember which one. It's been a while. And so here, these serpents, these women, were coming in and poisoning the men. And they were doing it through the water, through the word that they were telling them, and it was tasting like honey on their tongue. Go to Proverbs 1-9. It's going to speak of these 2 women. Though they hate to give wisdom to a woman. They hate to say that wisdom's a woman, and yet that's clearly what it is showing you in allegory. It is showing your 2 covenants here. In Galatians 4:24, it's showing daughter Babylon versus daughter Zion. And it just is endless. And it says, I will cause enmity between the woman's seed and the harlot spirit that Adam chose a covenant with. Her name is also Baal. But the idea is that he fell in love with himself as God. He fell in love with his own words and doctrines that he wrote. So he could build himself up with thick clay, it states. And so mother says to this daughter, she says, fine, the men don't want you. And she threatens the men too, then you won't have my scepter, you won't have my rulers. That's Psalm 106. But then she promises the daughter what's going to happen. When she tells her in Zechariah 11, it is a woman in Zechariah 11, which represents the righteous spirit that was given covenant, that the men, which were the high priests here, were rejecting a covenant with because they took full control of the law and began to write it. We're told all about that through scriptures and through Jeremiah. It tells us this. And it also tells us in Malachi chapter 2 that they were writing violence against their sisters into the law. They were saying, oh, it's by God. God says it's okay because, well, you wicked women need to just get in line because us men are so much more righteous than you. And that's what the he Godhead teaches. It teaches this idea that a man is more moral and upright than any woman could ever hope to be. And thus we also have an image of a male dying on the cross for the bride, a female. And so she's got to be more wicked. And yet here we have in Numbers 21 and throughout that there's 2 serpents. There's 2. And one is going to poison you with wormwood that's going to taste like honey on your tongue. It's called Old Testament law. That's the covenant between the harlot and fallen Adam, and that subjugates righteous women. What is the Antichrist? So he's not like Christ. This is fallen Adam. He's not a thing like Christ. He wants to rule himself. He don't want to receive the righteous daughter's words that come from Mother God, that governs the nations of earth. So he's in opposition to Christ's spirit. And so what does he put in play? Well, he puts in play the old covenant, or what they call the old covenant. What's the old covenant? Old Testament law, which is used to subjugate women. Malachi speaks of it. The Jeremiah, I forget which chapter, speaks of what they did to the law. They took control of the law. Isaiah, in through the Isaiahs, it says the same thing of the high priest that took control of the laws and began to write it the way they want it written. And, one of the ridiculous laws that they wrote is found in Numbers 11, the law of bitter water. It is just absolutely ridiculous. It was simply a method to poison a woman when they didn't want her around. That's all it was. And this idea that a man can tell a woman what her rights is from God is absolutely ludicrous. He's a sinner. He's an absolute sinner, just like we are. But he has to tell us, because again it feeds into this false theology that a man or a male is more righteous than a female and therefore must keep her in line through the laws that he's got to write. No. Christ died upholding daughter Zion upon his shoulder and her commandments, which was the 10 commandments of God. Nowhere do you see a woman subjugated under a man. And yet Mother says in Hosea 2, and it is Mother speaking, it's not Father speaking. I don't care what anybody says. It's Mother speaking. And she says to her daughter, I will remove the name of Baal out of your mouth, because your husband is not your Lord and your master. He's not your ruler. He never was. But the laws that he wrote made it appear that way, which is the doctrine that fed out from Mount Jerusalem. It says in Galatians 4 here, it says, for this Hagar, that's your Babylon, is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and answereth to Jerusalem, which now is and is in bondage with her children. Verse 26, but the Jerusalem which is above is free, which is the mother of us all, which was represented by Sarah in this chapter. And she got it from Eve, mother of all living. All right? This covenant has persisted throughout the ages of time. All right? And it is just waiting. This covenant is just waiting to be fulfilled. God has a specific time when these daughters of Zion will rise up. And Christ says to his beloved, I beg you to earnestly contend for the faith that I once gave you. This truth was once known upon my death. But those mighty men, those wicked men come in and sat beside you and took it away out of your mouth again. Alright? So he says, I earnestly contend to my beloved for the faith that was once gave to you. I died to exalt the daughter of Zion. And she is the righteous spirit that was represented and symbolized as that brass serpent around a scepter that would give life to you. That's what she was symbolizing. So, what's some of these other passages I wanted to look at here? So, again, allegory. Where else might we find this allegory? Once we understand that it is an allegory that we're actually looking at, that it is a figurative understanding that we have to walk away with on this. Well, we're going to find verses like this, all right? And I've read this on other videos, so for anybody who hasn't seen my videos, I'll read it for you, and I'll read it for the rest of us. So it's in Song of Songs, chapter 1, verse 6. Look not upon me, because I am black. To be black in scriptures means to be with false doctrine, empty doctrines. She does not have the doctrine of truth. That takes us back to the daughter Zion, who gave birth to wind and did not deliver what she was supposed to deliver, which was the delivering of the children to Mother God. She says, I must restore back that which I took not away, which is the children. But yet Mother says in Hosea 2, I'll call her out of the vineyard, and I'll give her children back to her. I'll give her vineyard back to her. Look not upon me, because I am black, because the sun hath looked upon me, my mother's sons. And it could be the harlots too. The daughters were there too. The harlot daughters were there too. Were angry with me. They made me the keeper of the vineyard. but my own vineyard have I not kept. Well, what is that about? Well, we know what it's about. She was taught that harlot and fallen Adam's lying theology. And that vineyard became known as Adam's vineyard because it was teaching the tickling doctrines. That's what she was doing. And these two women are an allegory to covenant. Again, it takes us there. Go to Isaiah 54. It'll say, more are the children of the desolate than of she who has a husband. She who had a husband was Baal. He married himself and his own doctrines is what you're getting in allegory. Again. So, Isaiah 54, you go there. And then we look at the word bronze, all right, in connection to this. All right? Yeah. This is important to understand. Our color here, bronze. Where am I supposed to be going? Did I write bronze down? Yeah. Okay, yeah, I also, just briefly, let's go to Jeremiah before we move on to that word bronze, okay? So Jeremiah, what does it say? For anybody who thinks that this has nothing to do with it, the daughter of Zion, they'll say peace, peace, right? When you hear them speaking that, right, when there's peace and, what's the other word? Peace and I can't remember. But they'll say when they're speaking these two words, I tell you, I'm tired when I can't remember that other word. You know, to look out. That's in the book of Thessalonians when they're saying peace and security, right? But yet, that's not what this word is really all about. We're told what that word is about when we understand the key of David. And you get passages to this understanding, Ezekiel 13, which is then going to take you to passages that you find in Jeremiah 6, 8, and 9. So what does it say? We'll start in verse 6, Jeremiah, verse 14, it says, they have healed also the hurt of the daughter of my people slightly, saying, peace, peace, when there is no peace. The covenant between the harlot spirit and fallen Adam will never lead to peace. Never. Because it leads to the subjugation of the righteous daughter, which is represented as the righteous spirit on this earth. And so look out when they're saying peace, peace, when there is no peace. And they're saying security. And yet we have all these man-made laws, which are leading to the subjugation of so many people. So you find that in Jeremiah chapter 6. I'm losing my voice. In chapter 8 and chapter 9 of Jeremiah, you'll find all of these references to no healing of the daughter. Well, what daughter didn't get healed? Well, that was the daughter of Zion. Well, how are you going to heal her? By the covenant between righteous man and the righteous spirit known as daughter Zion. Well, we have the example of Christ. He's the beginning of the covenant, right? This new covenant being restored. It's the mother sending her only begotten son and her daughter that restores this covenant fully. But this Antichrist comes on scene to enforce the Old Testament law, covenant, between the harlot and fallen Adam, which is the Antichrist. He comes against Christ's spirit, which is the daughter Zion. Well, where is the healing in a harlot spirit taught doctrine that subjugates a woman under a man's teachings and laws? My rights never came from no man. My rights came from God, and he had no right to take them away from me. Fallen man had no right to take them away from me. And that's why it also says in Micah, we'll get back to that word bronze in a minute. What does it say in the book of Micah of these daughters known as lionesses with the dew of heaven? That's the doctrine of truth in their mouth, no guile. They're the 144,000 standing on Mount Zion, not poisoned by the harlot spirit's teaching as taught to her by fallen Adam, who just gobbles it up on his tongue. Oh, he loves it, but it is cobra's venom and it's wormwood. It's killing him. That's what it's doing. And what does it say? It says, and the remnant of Israel, not Jacob, shall be among the Gentiles. This is that staff that was broken in Zechariah 11, when mother told the daughters on to break that staff, symbolizing that the men no longer wanted a covenant with the righteous daughters of Zion, and that she was also breaking a covenant with these daughters of Zion, that the Spirit was upon them, and it would now come off of them. And she says to that daughter Zion that breaks that staff as a symbol of the breaking of the covenant, that she will enlarge in that birthright. All right? So, but what does it say here? It says in verse 7, in the remnant of Israel, not Jacob. This is the woman's seed. Shall be in the midst of many people as they do. That's the doctrine of truth. No guile in their mouth. They're the 144,000 daughters not poisoned by fallen Adam's lying theology that is ruled by the harlot spirit. That's why men are not circumcised today. They'll say, oh, well, no, he's not circumcised because it's part of the law. No! That was part of the covenant with Mother God. When she told Abraham, you will be circumcised as a symbol that you will not hearken to the harlot spirit and her words. That's what that symbolized. And she also says, no uncircumcised will enter into my new city. None. And Christ was circumcised. We'll say, yeah, but that's under the law. This is symbol. This is symbology. It's symbolizing who their covenant is still within their heart, because this word is like honey on their tongue. It leads to the subjugation of the righteous daughters. There is no healing for the hurt of the daughters. There's no healing under this covenant. And the only way that this world has a chance, even a remote chance of standing, is if the daughters are healed. And the way that they are healed is through the Spirit of truth. You have to understand the truth and not fallen Adam's and the harlot's theology that has fed out to the entire globe. But Mother says, I'm going to restore the original stronghold. That's daughter Zion. Figurative of a stronghold is argument. It's interesting that Solomon attacked these righteous daughters here. And I won't get into the symbology there. It's just too much right now because I still want to look at the word bronze. But it says, who many people as dew from the Lord, as the showers upon the grass, that tarrieth not for man, nor waiteth for the sons of men. All right. So it means we're not appointed, sorry about that, by men. Men will never appoint a woman to nothing good. He wants to be able to point at her. These daughters are appointed by God. They are chosen by God herself. Okay. So I want to look at that. Now I wanted to look at the word bronze. And we'll find that in Hebrew number 5153. Nakush of bronze, brass, steel. Hebrew number 5154. Figurative understanding of the word brass or bronze is strength, and it's a feminine here. All right? And it's interesting because the daughter Zion's hooves are of brass. That's Micah 4:13, okay? But watch what Job says. This is interesting because this is actually going to take us back to the physical makeup of Christ. And this is important. People say, well, no, we worship in spirit. Yes, we do. But there is a physical correlation. We're body and spirit, are we not? And they could say, well, yeah, but it's spirit. And it is spirit. You're right, it is spirit. We just proved that. They were poisoned by the harlot spirit. They were not receiving the truth of the righteous spirit. Known as daughter Zion, that serpent wrapped around the scepter, Zion, daughter Zion is your ruler, that you're going to have to look to, which is the righteous spirit of Christ actually manifested on this earth to give you life, eternal life. There is a physical counterpart to that. Job 6:12, what does Job say here? He says, is my strength the strength of stones, or is my flesh of brass? Wow. I found that rather telling. Because, you know what I got out of that? When we're ruled by the righteous spirit, and I can't get into it because I'm running out of time. But when we're ruled by the righteous spirit, the daughter Zion, that's exactly what our flesh is going to look like. Our bones is going to be powerful like stone, and our skin is going to be like brass. Well, you can say, well, where do you get that idea from? Well, remember, what did Christ say to John? Not John, but to Thomas, doubting Thomas, in John 20, verse 27. What did he say? He says, then Jesus said to Thomas, put your finger here and look at my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side, and stop doubting and believe. He was saying, I'm here in the flesh. Look at me, I'm real. But what else did Christ do? He didn't have a body like this, did he? He was resurrected by the righteous spirit. What did he do? He ascended. He ascended into heaven. By the way, he didn't have wings. He had heavenly authority is what he had. That's what wings symbolize. Heavenly authority. Whether they're on this earth or whether they're in heaven. They're a symbol of heavenly authority. Now Christ ascended, but he did not ascend in this body. This flesh, if I ascended out there, I'd be dead just like that. He was resurrected with a new body. Right? And it's telling you. Job is telling you, he says, what? Is my strength the strength of stones? He said, your strength is what makes you stand. That's symbology again of the daughter Zion. Your bones is your foundation that causes this body to stand. Here they're called stones. The strength of a stone. Or is my flesh of brass? Wow. And Jesus is described as this having this color. So he ascends. Well, he certainly did not ascend with a body like what I have or like you have. He ascended with a much different body. And here we have this serpent of brass. Brass symbolizes in allegory your strength. His strength is your spirit that you're founded upon. That's your strength. That's your stronghold. That's what protects you from death in this case. And they had to look to her, which was the daughters of Zion, which was what Balaam was telling Balak. Balaam was telling Balak, go get your harlots and send them in and seduce the men of Israel. And we'll take the strong right hand, daughter Zion, out that way. And that's just what they did. And mother told him, fine, you don't want her rule? We'll cast them out in the fields of the Gentiles and you won't have the rule. And then she tells the daughter Zion, break that staff and cast what they'll give you for that mantle, which was 30 pieces of silver representing Christ, the new Adam. And she says, I will remake it. And she tells her all about it in Isaiah 49. She says, you'll not only come to indwell. See, we have the indwelling spirit as the one that's the tabernacle is made for. All right? So, again, it's interesting. Christ did not ascend into heaven with a flesh, but yet he had a body. Because he says to Thomas, touch and see that I am real. I'm a real physically made being. But he was not made of this weak, sinful flesh. Because he'd been resurrected by the spirit of daughter Zion, which is your allegory to the serpent on the pole wrapped around the scepter, known as a scion. Isaiah 42 verse 16. I will lead the blind by ways they have not known. Along unfamiliar paths I will guide them. I will turn darkness into light before them and make the rough places smooth. That means reveal the truth, to make smooth. That means she's going to pull off that daughter Zion and she's going to make it smooth so you can see the real foundation that we're supposed to be founded upon. The truth is going to be revealed. These are the things I will do, and I will not forsake them. Isaiah 6:4, and the foundations of the threshold trembled and moved at the voice of the one who called out while the temple was filled with smoke. I speculated, it almost looks like the gate, the pathway moved, right? And yet here in Isaiah 42, she says, I'll restore the correct path back to you because you're on the wrong path. And I do that through the blood and the water, the flesh and the spirit. That's the word manifested here. We're told you get your word from your wife. You're told that in Proverbs chapter 5. She is a well, she is a water. We're also told the bride, Song of Song 4:12, is a fountain, a garden seal. And so it's speaking of the manifested spirit of Christ, known as the key of David. So bronze, amber, it's amazing when you think of what our new bodies just may look like. And I think Job gave us a hint of that again. Is my strength the strength of stones? Or is my flesh of brass? And Christ, we often get that display of how beautiful he looked, golden, he looked amber, he looked like a glowing metal. The glory is often described as look like glowing metal. And that's the daughter Zion when she's back where she's supposed to be. And so I gotta go. I can't finish everything I wanted to. Anything else? Strong's Hebrew amber 2830. Perhaps amber, glowing metal. Amber is supposed to be an amalgam of gold and silver. Amber probably bronze or polished spectrum of metal. So they're given a range here, and it's really fascinating because that links you to the cherubim or the cherubim in Ezekiel 1. I have 3 places where amber shows up: Ezekiel 1:4, Ezekiel 1:27, and Ezekiel 8:2. If you want to go look at that. So I thank all for watching my video. I appreciate it. I hope I said something that made a little bit of sense, especially to anybody new, maybe pulling the video up and watching it for the first time, this theology. So again, thanks for watching. Love my brothers and sisters. Pray the Lord bless you. And I hope you all have a really nice day.